Hello, everyone, and welcome to the number one new podcast right now. Let Me Talk, where we have interesting conversations about interesting topics with interesting people. I'm your host, Tom, and today we're going to talk about the Cleveland Metropolitan School District Issue 68. It's an extension as well as an addition to a tax levy to help funding the schools, and it's one of those things where it seems like there's a lot of people that are really in line with wanting to pass this because education, you've got to put money there. And though I agree, I have a bit of a concern about the corruption aspect of it. And frankly, I know a lot of other people do. And so we're talking tonight with Chris Serio. He is a CMSD school teacher, teaches English. This is about his 6th year teaching in the district. And frankly, he's got a really strong background and a really good understanding of the details of this issue. So I want us to be able to get this information back out to you guys. And we've got the chat going. If anyone has any questions, feel free to ask them in the chat. Anyway, right now, let's let Chris talk. How's it going, Chris?
I'm doing well, Tom. How are you?
Very good. Very good. I really hope to come out of this going, okay, you know what? I really should vote yes for this levy because, I mean, we kind of spoke. I think you kind of know some of my concerns. Like, my concerns are, unfortunately, they have nothing to do with what I think the purpose of the levy is.
Yeah.
It's supposed to be about getting money to the kids. It's supposed to be about educating them. But my concerns are, and frankly, they're concerns. Hell, I had a current CMSD teacher also send me a thing over the internet's basically saying, one, the administration is pressuring me to push this, and I don't know about this person's like political spectrum or anything.
Mm-hmm.
But like when I was pointing out that it doesn't seem like everything is completely on the up and up, she was like, hey, I'm right there with you. Like, and this is what's going on to me. And then she started talking about how there is a lot of corruption. Like, our mayor has family that works for CMSD that has no background in education. As much as there is this additional money is for the kids and it's going to help the kids, there's also that aspect of, if they're saying, hey, it's for the kids, then let's just ignore corruption. That's,
okay.
That's kind of, that's part of my beef to it. So yep. I don't know. Help me figure this out, dude.
So let me start by saying, if anyone knows anything about Ohio's funding, it's our schools are based on property taxes.
Right.
And so whenever I went to a suburban high school, Twinsburg, very well funded. So I am a product of white flight for, southeast suburbs, Twinsburg, Hudson, Solon, Aurora. Macedonia, when I was growing up, they all had busing, they all had phenomenal funding. We had, home economics. I remember in 7th and 8th grade, I had wood shop, metal shop, home ec, and computers. So we took one each quarter, and I still have the bench and the CD player that I made and the car and the toolbox. And like, again, I know what it's like to go to a school system that is well funded. And so having now worked in the inner city, I see how the other end of that, as well as talking with and seeing some firsthand experience with rural education. Rural and urban education have a lot of the same issues, and they're both revolving around a lack of funding, which is very difficult for some people to grasp, because we sit here and say without an education, you really can't go far. But we're funding our schools on property taxes, which in Ohio has been declared unconstitutional 4 times by our Supreme Court. Woo! So go ahead and look that one up. We currently have a Democrat and a Republican in our state Senate or House. I'm not sure. I just remember it's one of each. They're working on a new funding formula, but I'll be honest with you, I don't think it's going to work as long as property taxes even still exist, and we use it for funding schools. Schools should be funded, much differently. And I mean, I think we've failed since Bush, Obama, and now Trump. I mean, we've failed to fund our schools.
Yeah.
And funding hasn't recovered since the fiscal cliff of 2009, which was when I was starting college. So so having now done, and even working on the west side to the east side, there was a massive disparity in economics there. I was working at a brand new building where we got technology that was much higher end that could work with our building. And now I'm working at a building that is, not in the best of conditions. And the laptop I have is barely functioning. So I used my own personal one, so west side of the east side of Cleveland even has its own funding disparities from what I've now seen. And there's also more students on the west side than the east side. But more importantly, and again, back to funding is a huge problem. So something people don't realize, whenever they cancel testing for like the regular schools, or they so claimed. I think Trump claimed that they were going to cancel testing. I know my children did not have their testing canceled. So basically, whenever like Cleveland's children will always test more than their general suburbs. And here's why. Whenever the local funding is not able to cover, the state and the local funding are not able to cover, districts, especially larger inner city districts, have to go to the federal government.
Okay.
And when you take the federal government's money, it's a double-edged sword, because then you have to take tests. Like your kids have to take standardized tests. Granted, you get to pick, but the fact that your children are now testing on top of the already state graduation requirements. So then our kids have to do the NWEA. And so that's something that their suburban counterparts don't have to do. Once they finish the OSTs, that's it. My kids, for example, I mean, again, this is a demographic difference. ESL students are doing the OLPA. So there is a massive amount of testing, but what you don't hear is how the poor districts are the ones being over-tested, but the districts speaking up about testing are the suburban ones. And so they're the ones who actually have the least amount of testing.
It kind of it boils down to, when it comes to, in order for the school districts to qualify for the federal funding, then the kids have to go through additional testing.
Oh yeah, and the benchmark assessment is one of the words I've heard since, I started in the College of Education. Benchmark assessment, this, that, and the other. And one of the things I'm very grateful for is I now know the difference between proficiency versus growth, and I know the difference, which some people in education don't, and I also know the difference between a mistake and an error. And so, as a teacher, I see us making a lot of mistakes. They're not errors because we're speaking up and attempting to correct them. It's just no one's willing to listen, so it's a mistake. So I think the fact that, Ohio's Supreme Court has declared it unconstitutional, the fact that we have to take federal funds and there's all these benchmark assessments that my children have to go through. You've got to remember, Cleveland is the poorest large size city in the United States. Right. 100% of our students are on free or reduced lunch. Something a lot of people aren't talking about. So they start saying, well, the benchmark assessments have been pretty flat. Mm-hmm. Well, what people don't realize is when we switched over from the OGT to the OST, the OGT was a walk in the park. Having taken the OGT my 10th grade year, I passed every single part the first time. I got accelerated on every single one and just walked about my business and went and did my AP, this, that, and the other that the suburbs push. Okay, the OGT in the inner city, it was a push and a challenge, but the kids could pass it. So the state of Ohio in 2015 switched to the OST. So the OGT was the Ohio Graduation Assessment. You took reading, writing, math, social studies, and science, one each day of the week. And like at Twinsburg, we had half a day and then you went home. It was great. Didn't overwork our brains. We actually made the testing environment much better. So in the inner city, usually students will pass it by their senior year, or they will fail it and have to take it in the summer and then like end up graduating at the end of the summer.
Okay.
But students would still pass it. The OST, the new one, is the devil incarnate. So while I love Common Core, don't get me wrong, the OST is much harder because it's whether you're college ready. And so not everyone is college ready. So why is that our graduation test? Not a good idea.
Yeah.
We have college ready assessments such as the ACT and SAT. So, why is the state of Ohio doing this? Why are you making enough? If the OGT, I guess I thought the OGT was good enough. Now you're making it even harder, especially when you have a district, like Cleveland, where you have trades that are built into the high schools. Yeah, if you pass your trade test, that can be your bypass for graduation. But what if I didn't know what I wanted to do and I was just going to work a full-time job for a while after high school because I didn't know if I wanted to go to college or community college? Why should I have to take a college ready assessment if I'm perfectly capable of going and functioning in the world by myself? So,
Mhm.
I mean, I have a lot of issues with the OST in itself. But I mean, that sort of hit Cleveland really hard, and a lot of our students are struggling to pass it. And so while our students have made major gains, I'm teaching, a lot of students, the students that are showing up. I think the lowest reading level I have this year is 7th grade in the 9th grade. And I thought that's phenomenal. That's amazing. I can work with that. I
Right.
did ESL for the first 4 years. So I had reading levels all over the place with the LAU codes and everything. So I'm like, uh, I could do this. So I was actually really impressed because the stereotype behind it is that our kids are so far behind. The thing is, we just don't have students who show up. The students who do show up are actually doing a great job. When they're pushed, they will perform and function at what they need to do, if not better.
Well, that's
Um,
one of the things that I've always participation actually seems to encourage
yes,
just everything. But it's
yes,
a matter of getting somebody there that,
correct.
I've got my background is a little bit strange. I went to the Cleveland School of Science.
Okay.
The little back then it was, we were still down on Lakeside, the building with the planetarium, and we joked it was a little genius social experiment because there was some kind of weird approval. I was asked to go there. The people that went there with me, they were all asked to go there, and it was like, what is this? And then over time we kind of realized some of the details of it, and it was a different form of education, and we were definitely allowed different things. Unfortunately I was removed from there because one of the cool things to being us was we were allowed to leave whenever we wanted.
Mhm.
And so I would consistently get bored of some of the stuff going on there. So I cut school to go to CSU and listen to lectures there. And it was, I mean, it was cool, going to
Mhm.
college. I wasn't in college, but I had no idea before all this that you could just sneak into lectures pretty much no problem and no one really cared. But I mean, and it was so cool for me. But for most kids, if they're going to cut school, they're not going to educate.
Yeah.
And one
Yes.
of the key things to getting someone enthusiastic or engaged, they've got to be there. It's even with sports, they say the best ability is availability. you know you've
Yeah.
got to be able to get there, or else everything kind of falls to the wayside.
Hmm.
And so I get that.
And again, let me emphasize that about half the kids that don't show up, they don't show up because they don't want to. The other half, their parents, especially right now during the pandemic with online learning, the parents assume that they're online. They say that they are, and the parents don't know that they're failing until the teacher contacts them or the report card comes out because the parents at work. And you can't really at that point in time when your kid's a freshman in high school, you're hoping and assuming I taught you to do better than that, but you're an independent person, you're going to do what you're going to do. So where do you draw that line? And so a lot of it is rebellious teenage nature, especially when you're given the option and the independence that a lot of our kids already have anyway. So attendance is a big issue. And I think if the kids would come, like you said, participation is actually half the fight in the battle, because what the state, and I will agree with this, that what they want to try and move to is a more Socratic like discussion, where especially this can be done very nicely in the humanities, in English and history, where the kids are more guiding and asking the questions and having like more of like a circular discussion, which is why on days that I do that, I literally put it in a Socratic circle. I ask a few questions and then let the kids go from there, you know? So like, again, the setup of your classroom is also really important. So, I mean, pre and post COVID, that will change. Like I have like groups because I'll do different activities at different stations and whatnot. So like, that's how my room is set up right now, but I'll change the setup. But that's how, a lot of kids, by having that discussion, especially with their peers, they learn best. And a lot of them may have it online as well. So it's a question of, can you reach out and have these discussions with your kids? Like I am friends with a lot of my former students who have graduated. And so like, I still edit papers for some of them. Like some of them will still ask me stuff on like sources, because a lot of like the idea of fake news, I've started something I always harped on, is .gov, .org, .com, the validity of sources. And I always push personally the BBC News app and the Reuters News app, because that's where I get my national and world news. Local news sources are pretty reliable, regardless of where they lie on the spectrum, because local news is pretty standard, local. But for national news and for like world news, I tell the kids, Reuters and the BBC News app are like my two go-tos. So like I push that. And so like my students know how to utilize that in my classroom, for example. And so when we look at the kids and we're reading like 8th grade reading levels and whatnot, it's not what it seems. A lot of it is reading fluency. Maybe our children didn't test well. Maybe our children just didn't understand a word that was being used, but they understand the concept of the word. There's so many different variables as to why our test scores aren't going up. Here's something else no one thinks of. And I know this firsthand because I was working with the Puerto Rican population. When Maria hit, a lot of them started migrating to the mainland in America because they're American citizens. They can come and go as they please. A lot of what I found out, my students are from the more countrysides of Puerto Rico. And so a lot of those schools are incredibly underfunded and incredibly poor, AKA the rural aspect I was telling you about. So why I can say it's similar, those children are the same, if not lower reading and writing levels as their inner city, counterparts. And a lot of my Hispanic Puerto Rican students, they can speak and listen in Spanish, but they maybe can't read or write higher than a 2nd grade level. And so then, as an ESL teacher, that's English as a second language, my entire English ESL training was on this thing called negative transfer. It's the idea that the child already knows how to read and write in their native tongue, L1. I take that ability, the inherent ability to read and write, and I teach them to like take those skills and use English. Well, here's the problem. Our children don't even have that base ability. So how do I do my job? I'm not a trained kindergarten teacher where I'm trained to like teach them how to read and write like that. I had to improvise, because what I quickly learned was my children's L1 is so shaky. I'm not going to be able to teach L2 very easily and proficiently. There's not enough resources. And while I got together with the Spanish teacher and we tried to like create a dual language program and get the kids going, there's also the downside of this Academies of Cleveland, where they wanted to do pure academies so the classes wouldn't match up, and I couldn't have, Spanish for native speakers. And so those students are struggling to read and write in their native tongue, as well as now learning it in English. And so those students are going to be limited for the rest of their life. And actually, it's part of the reason why I want to go do my PhD and help change curriculum for it, is because it's so devastating and it's going under the radar because it's ESL. We just assume they don't know English, when in reality, They know a lot more English because they can understand like hearing, but they can't read and write because guess what? There's a good chance they can barely do it in their native tongue. And so that's something that I believe is going unnoticed as well. And not just in Cleveland, but I mean, given the diversity of our ESL population, and you've got to remember, given the cheap cost of living, you could put like 3 or 4 families in Cleveland for the same price as one family in New York City.
Yeah.
So our, the west side of Cleveland is booming ESL.
Uh-oh. I think we had a little bit of a freeze up issue there. But I guess you can all kind of understand where he was going with that. Where really it's really focused on, even with the current level of funding that they've got right now, there's still so many challenges. Oh, are you back?
Yeah.
You definitely.
Yeah. Oh my God. Like you hit the nail on the head. There are so many issues that we just had, like people who don't work and don't understand in the inner city are not able to comprehend. Like we need so much more funding than what you think because there are so many more diverse issues. I mean, poverty is the biggest hurdle of them all because it's the real trickle-down economics of poverty is everything associated with poverty and the value systems and like just trying to survive. It's a battle in itself. So I understand the struggle, and I also understand where you're coming from as a taxpayer because you want accountability in your government. And I now more than ever feel that way. I mean, I felt that way since the Obama administration because I was not a fan of Arnie Duncan and his race to the top. I don't like, why is a superintendent who is not a teacher, he had a degree in sociology, but why is he running the Department of Education?
Yeah.
Why is anyone who has not been in the classroom doing, that's another problem with Cleveland principals. And I know Arizona's famous for this and Ohio started this. You don't necessarily have to be a teacher to become a principal, and you don't have to have a teaching degree to go into the classroom.
Yeah, you just need your administration's license.
Yeah, and so there's some people who are very much removed from actually the needs of our students, and it really shows. It's very toxic, it's very poisonous, and it's really damaging. And so the importance of, I believe, principals being in the classroom beforehand is really, really important. And I've seen great principals in Cleveland, like, Quentin Davis. I have a lot of respect for him. He was clearly in the classroom before he was a principal. Okay. And you can tell which administrators were in classrooms beforehand and which weren't. You can, very obvious as a teacher. And so, I mean, actually, if you ever want to hear the real inside scoop, do you want to know who you talk to? Especially, you talk to like the bilingual paras or the aides that follow the students around all day, especially like the 9th grade bilingual para in our building. She would follow the 9th grade students to every single class. So she sees what's going on in the 9th grade all day. And then the 10th grade para sees the 10th grade. So I only see a little bit of each grade when I was doing ESL. But like, if you really wanted to get an insight, always talk to the para or the secretaries, because the paraprofessionals will always have more information than the teachers.
Nice.
Fun fact, always. Something I've learned in education, anyone who's going into education, the secretaries and the paras, always, they're your best friends. Just as much as your union chair. And if you don't have a union chair, run away from that building as soon as possible. So
I definitely need to stay away from the union thing, because I have to admit, one of the things with digging into a lot of information I found about just I love what unions did.
Yes.
50 years ago.
Yes. Okay.
Unfortunately, I don't have a lot of high opinions of unions these days. And it's just, but that's not even something I really want to kick into. But with everything that we just talked about, and with everything that you pointed out about the need for the money involved with education, unfortunately, there's a lot of people out there that are going to be voting against this levy just because they don't think it's enough. Because they don't think, if you've heard, the juice is worth a squeeze. Because, yes, they're asking for more money, and they're asking to continue what it was raised to before. However, on the flip side is they also believe there's an exceptional amount of waste. Like no matter how much money is going to the students, it's not all going to the students.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
I agree.
so
I
mismanaged. And then you mix that in with the fact that it is unconstitutional to fund our schools this way. And with talking with any of the politicians involved, they all essentially say the same thing, which is, well, it is what it is. You know,
and
no one wants to go tackle that, so it's not going to get tackled. So then you've got the voters that are sitting there going, well, hold on. So they don't want to fix it. However, they want me to have to pay more money for something that they refuse to fix. So how do you reconcile that to them in a way that makes them go, wait a second, you should vote yes on this because of the kids, but here's why the kids are more important than everything else that you're
my union and my pay, blah 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 blah. I understand that argument, and even my parents will vouch for this. We don't make our cops pay for the guns. We don't make our firemen pay for our water. Why do the teachers have to pay for our supplies? You know, yeah, the school may give me a limited amount at the beginning, but I end up paying a lot of money out of pocket for supplies every year. The way I'm evaluated based on how my classroom looks. So like all those decorations, like that $1, $2, $3, $4, $5 section at Target, every teacher and their mother knows that that is a teacher's best friend, because that's where you get a lot of your little trinkets for your school supplies. And you have those everywhere, especially in your K-8 buildings where that's really heavy, especially your K-4, your elementary levels. So teachers, I cannot stress this enough. We pay for a lot out of pocket. So going back to a few things, Cleveland has not had an increase in the levy in 8 years. So given inflation, we've actually lost money. So I don't think it's unfair of them to ask for an additional $5 million. I think it's tough for people because we're in a pandemic and the economy is slumping right now. And so I understand that aspect of it. And so if they choose to vote it down, again, this is a really hard pill for me to swallow because, you know, there's a good chance I could lose my job. I'm only 6 years in. I'm okay with it. You know, we're in a bad economy right now. That's, you know, que sera, sera. There's nothing I can do. I don't have my master's. I was planning on applying for my PhD this year, and this was supposed to be my last year. But, you know, if I don't get my job cut, I'm not leaving yet because there's a pandemic going on, you know.
Right.
My PhD can wait, and I don't really want to pay for it out of pocket. So
I understand.
like, where's that assistantship? So let me be frank when I say I don't think it's unreasonable after 8 years for Cleveland to ask for an increase, especially when the cost of living has increased. And I also think that I think it's not fair to look at the tests, because the tests are so much harder that every district has gone down compared to where they were with like OGT to the OST conversion. And so I think it's going to take time. Nothing in education is consistent enough for it to set in and take time. Excuse me. And I think that's part of the problem, is it's too political. Like, stop and let something work. Like, bilingual education will not work overnight. It's going to take a few decades for it to actually work. And people think it's going to work overnight, and then they pull the funding away, and and then they wonder why it's a failed program. You know, education, we stopped talking about how the teacher is involved for 8 hours out of the day, but we still need to make sure that the parent is, you know, reading with the kid, going over math and whatnot at night.
Right.
Or that there's those after school services. A lot of those get cut first whenever there's school funding that goes. And so like city
that
here
seems to be even a suburban issue where, you know, anything that's usually when you hear about levies for some of the suburban areas, they're talking about, you know, we need a levy so they can play football.
Yep. Or busing. A lot of them cut busing so they didn't have to keep passing levies. But it's pay to play sports now. I know a lot of them have, like, when I was in high school, I had the privilege of taking foods and I was on block scheduling. So we actually got to cook because we had an hour and a half. That foods class, I don't think is offered at Twinsburg anymore. If it is, good for them. I learned a lot of basic cooking from that and from my uncle's restaurant. And from my family, just, you know, being Italian. But that was a great class to have. And for anyone who had never, it was a great introduction to cooking. We used to have a life skills class that, taught you how to balance a checkbook, change a tire, the baby, how to change the diaper, the crying and everything. We had a class like that, but it was too expensive to continue to fund it. And then people will complain they don't want to give the school more funding, and then they complain that we can't do the basic things that they were able to do. Well, you cut the funding for it. Well, then why are you working with all these computers? Well, because that's where the technology is going. Well, you're spending too much money on these high fancy computers. Well, that's where the technology is going. Like internet is no longer a luxury. It's a necessary utility. It needs to start being treated like it's a utility. And as I don't want to get political, Amy Klobuchar has been looking into rural internet for a while. That immediately became a very big thing because 50% of America doesn't have access to internet.
Yeah. That's so crazy to me. But at the same time, I look at it. One of the things that's frustrating to me is I've learned a little bit about how some of the utilities are handled in the city of Cleveland.
Yeah. And it's so corrupt.
Oh my God, it's such a mess.
It's so bad.
There's such a thing when it comes to like who owns the infrastructure and who this and who that. And I'm like, well, hold on a second. Ultimately, different companies, they just want to have your monthly service. They want the residual they can get from that and whatever. So why not, in the case of the rural situations or whatever, make these companies actually pay to get service out there? If you want to, make that a statewide thing. If you want to have something specific that's going to be in the major metropolitan area, you have to set up the infrastructure for the entire state.
I'm all about it. And I think this pandemic has opened our eyes to the fact that this inequality is real. And we sit here and wonder, well, how can you function with access to the internet and all this information? Well, hold up. Pump your brakes, put the car in reverse and back up, because these people don't have access to the internet. And that's, again, I cannot stress that people don't realize that. Rural and inner city, if they don't have a cell phone, and even with the Obama phone, as they call it, even with the government cell phone, that's limited minutes. I don't even know if the internet works on that. And if it does, it's probably like a Wi-Fi hookup or something. But I know that really doesn't work, because I had students who were taking notes because their computer wasn't working. Yeah. Granted, props to the district and props to Eric Gordon for getting the kids Chromebooks.
Now, here's a question. While we're there real quick, that just reminds me of something that frankly, one of the I guess people who are kind of in the know of some of what's going on there pointed out I guess the total dollars that from pandemic relief that was given to them, divided it by the number of students, and it boiled down to somewhere a little over $900, per student. And that money is supposed to, I guess, primarily go towards getting the kids these Chromebooks, having them be able to learn and whatnot. Why is there such a problem then? Because the funding is there.
So here's something we don't touch on, and here's where I will give Eric Gordon props. The district is giving away, and they have once a week pickups. So parents can go pick up at the child's school a week's worth of lunches for breakfast and lunch. The parents can go pick that food up for their child at a designated school. So some of that funding has been put because we were using our reserve foods we were using like our reserves. So a lot of that funding is also used to restore that food that we're still giving to our families.
Okay.
So some of that money is the free or reduced funding, and then some of it, now we're bagging everything, we're freezing it, so we do need some more of that money for the mechanics and storing all this extra food that, I do understand the district. That's not something that I know is widely reported on. Everyone knows about the Chromebooks, but then no one really knows, they're still giving away free breakfast and lunch as long as your child is a student. Parents just go pick it up from whatever building they're at.
And that doesn't come from any other funding? Because I know there's different kinds of funding.
Yeah. I don't have Cleveland's budget in front of me, although I do know the union did just get the first few months. But again, with a lot of our funding right now, this is really important because a lot of state and federal funds have been cut. So that's why it's super important that we pass issue 68.
Yeah.
They're saying we're going to go back, and here's what people don't know. We're already at the legal minimum for support staff, like our paraprofessionals and translators. So it will be teachers who will be cut. Like it will be primarily teachers. Obviously 1111 is going to be cutting, it's assumed they're going to be cutting heavily on principals as well, but it's primarily going to be teachers and principals. It's not going to be like the support staff, like what you'd think.
See, here was another thing that was brought up to me, though, is why is it, because one thing is clear, as soon as Gordon came in, Cleveland apparently now has one of the most admin heavy school districts in the world. Why is it we're worried about cutting teachers and they're not going to, I mean, it almost looks like a situation where, wait a second, there's so many administrators, hey, Frank Jackson has kids that work there or grandkids that work there that no experience teaching. Why is it that these people aren't going to be the first ones to get cut? Why is it that the kids have to get hurt?
So one of
your kitty.
Yeah. Oh, my dog is giving me this look right now. So one of the things is the mayor actually appoints the board, and it's approved with the Ohio House of Representatives. So people in like Xenia and Zanesville, Ohio, their representative has a say on our school board because we took that away from the locality because it was so corrupt and unfunctionable in the 90s. So this woman named Barbara Bird Bennett apparently comes to mind, and she's in prison, I guess. I was too young when it was happening, but to every Clevelander, that name is infamous, and so it apparently rings true still.
I'm almost 50. Oh yeah, I know.
Okay, so I know. I did some digging about her after. So I think it's wrong. I think it's wrong that the people of Cleveland don't have control over it. So ladies and gentlemen, if you are dissatisfied with the school district, just remember you need to vote in your local election because your mayor sort of picks the school board.
And here's also that's when it comes to local politics, it's such a mess. I mean, and I don't know whether anyone's really going to be mad about me saying this or not, but guess what? You know who our next mayor is going to be?
Don't say it. No.
Come on.
No, it's not. No. You know what? There's enough dissatisfaction and grumbling, and you'd be surprised. I don't think he will rerun.
He's retiring. But the anointed one is already decided.
Oh.
And unfortunately, the thing about Cleveland politics, the only thing that really matters is name recognition. I mean, there was even a couple of elections ago, there was someone, a East Side businessman, Ken Lancey, who millionaire, all of the money, all of the conservative backing in the world you could want to get. He threw every bit of money at this election and still lost. And you want to know why he lost? He lost because nobody knew what the hell his name was. That's it.
He didn't go door to door.
That's Cleveland. It's just like with our council. That's why instead of us actually having fair elections when it comes to the council, usually what will happen is one of the council seats will decide we're going to move on to something else. So we're appointing this person to be the next rep. And within that, however long that person is the rep until their election, they've built up enough name recognition. So then when it comes to their election time, everyone knows that one's name. They didn't do anything to piss off the voters, and they don't know whoever's running against them, if anyone actually runs against them. So that's how things work here. Well, unfortunately, it's already been decided who the next mayor of Cleveland's going to be. We all know his name, because he's already a prominent Cleveland politician. So, I mean, that's the way it's going to go.
So, unfortunately, you're describing a parliament, which is essentially what it's become, because our executive and our legislature have become one, even though the executive, the mayor, should be separate from the council. Mm-hmm. Two separate bodies, one's executive, one's legislature. Let's keep them that way. So this is why it's important that we read and pay attention to local news. Everyone pays attention to national news, and they've paid attention to the hyper-partisan national BS, and they stopped paying attention to the local issues. And so that's one of the biggest problems. And so again, where's the Cleveland Plain dealer? Oh, lack of funding. So it's it's how do you disseminate this information, and then you have social media disseminating it, but it's not being well regulated. I mean, the next biggest threat to education, in my own personal opinion as an ESL teacher, ladies and gentlemen, you utilize it every single day almost, especially my generation, and I really need them to pay attention to this. Netflix, the CEO of Netflix, Reed Hastings, look at what he did when he was in the California school board. He pushed ESL instruction on those kids for hours on end, and it will never work. It will never work because they're not getting English at home. But that's a whole nother thing. This man who knew nothing of education tried to drastically change policy, and now he's out funding charter schools left and right. And then he tricks people, like with that recent grant to go help Black people he made a few months back. Again, don't be fooled because he's funding charter schools throughout California.
You know, that the charter school thing actually
charter
something else I
schools.
wanted to touch on too, because one of the with a lot of the back and forth about the Cleveland situation, one of the things that, including a couple of teachers, were pointing to was that, well, part of the challenge with Cleveland's budget is they were forced to pay money to charter schools. They're forced to pay money to charter schools. No one's corrected them on this. And just the other night, I was like, well, let me go look at it and see what I can find. In 15 minutes, I learned there was nothing forced on Cleveland by the state for this to happen. The Cleveland School Board voted to do this. And one of the other things is apparently the Cleveland gets to approve. No charter school exists in Cleveland unless CMSD approves it.
Yes, it has to be a CMSD charter.
Yeah, like Cleveland controls this. So unfortunately, that is another thing where it's like, well, wait a second. Why would I keep throwing more money at this when I keep finding, like, you start going down the rabbit hole and then you see, wait a second, I already know there's waste, but now I'm realizing that a lot of the arguments that were said by the people who are trying to prove that we should approve this, they're not even right on it. So what's the right thing to do?
It's because right now what the Cleveland plan did was it was a hybrid model of like local and state control. Whereas normally in a failing district, look at Toledo and Youngstown and Akron. The state's trying to replicate the Cleveland plan because if like, for example, if issue 68 fails, if the levy fails, the Cleveland plan fails. And so then the state has to take the district over because it's a failing district. So then that means the entire state, not just the House of Representatives, but like the governor, the Ohio Senate, like everything's involved. Now, mind you, Cleveland back in the 90s was also under a federal jurisdiction of a judge because of how segregated it was. And so when that gentleman died, it went back to local control. Something to look at there. Hint, 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 nudge, nudge. Because clearly the state is so gerrymandered right now as it is, even with that, I don't want to say BS, but I'm going to say BS, like amendment of the council where we approve the new districts. I don't believe that for a second. It's all gerrymandered still. So until you have more accurate representation, which I would like to start to push the ranked choice movement for Ohio, to do just that. Until you have more accurate representation, you're going to continue to have this gerrymandered mess where Republicans have a super majority at the state level where they're controlling a lot of this anyway. Because again, it's House Bill 525. House Bill, the Ohio House of Representatives, not the people of Cleveland. No.
If you get a chance, talk to who was our state rep? It is Sweeney, Bride Rose Sweeney. See if you can talk with her about it.
I would need to look into that. I thought that's not state, that's the federal level. Yeah, you're right. You're right. Well, I'm curious as to why it was under federal jurisdiction in the 90s and it's not now. Like, I feel like it's still just as segregated as it was de facto or de jure. So what changed there that it went from being under federal control to not? Because
I don't know if you would listen to my conversation with the ex-Cleveland teacher, Brett. One of the things that he pointed out that I had no idea about was that Ohio made a specific law that allows certain kind of controls and whatnot, specifically for what it considers mayor-run school districts. Okay, now, do you know how many mayor-run school districts there are in the state of Ohio?
There's probably a lot, and they're
One. It's
Cleveland.
Cleveland. That's
Cleveland,
it.
the Cleveland plan,
There's
and they're going to do
only
that
one.
in Toledo. They're going to do it in Youngstown and Akron because they're all failing districts. They're all major urban cities that have been deprived of resources. Do you want to know what's funny? They're not going after the poor rural districts because that's their constituency. So they're not going to do that. They're again, it's clearly political because if you're truly going after all the failing districts, why aren't you going after rural schools? Like,
yeah, it does. That makes sense to me.
Again, it doesn't. It's that because there's money to be made. And I'll tell you exactly what I'm talking about. So for every ESL student, English as a second language immigrant, you get $1,500 per pupil. For every special ed student, that's $1,500. So if you have a SPED ESL student, that's an extra $3,000 in federal funding to pay for those resources. So when there's that much money involved, there's bound to be corruption. And so when you it's overwhelming. It's disgusting. It's a nightmare. And so when you have people digging their hands around, when you have charter schools that are going unregulated, we saw the online charter school of like 2 years ago that, was lying about everything and went bankrupt, which, by the way, fun fact, a lot of charter schools, if I usually question, their ability to do well, and here's why. And so I'm sure there are some charter schools that are very good, but I question a lot of them. And so guess what they have the ability to do that public schools can't do? Before test time, they have the ability to suspend, expel a student for the most minor infraction because they're not run by the state. They don't have to follow all the state laws.
Okay.
They're run by essentially a charter. Their charter was approved by the state. They don't have to do everything that we do. So they can get rid of the low performing students right before testing time to inflate their test grades. And then they'll take the students who have disabilities at the beginning of the year to make sure that they get the attendance-based funding. We have all these SPED students and then get rid of them once the funding has been, slowly get rid of them once the funding's been dispersed because we don't have to necessarily respect due process.
Oh, wow.
Whereas public schools, a child on an IEP who misbehaves and hits a teacher, if they acted out and they have to have a manifestation hearing, and if that was due to if they acted out due to the IEP, you can't suspend them, or if you do, it's a violation of their rights. And we have to respect rights, and there's hoops, and there's again, this is why I like having my union, because someone has to protect my rights, and I'm advocating for my students. And I'm not going to speak on it now, but it'll become public knowledge someday. So I very much have done that in this district. I've advocated for my students left and right. And so and sometimes that's not something people want to hear. And so when you start calling these things out and questioning them, neither of my parents went to college. So education was a way to be successful. My dad's family are immigrants. Education is a way to get ahead in the world. So for me to see the way that this district is like so underfunded, that's why I think it kills me, because I'm like, we sit here and want to talk about this great meritocracy that is America, but what's supposed to be the main social safety net, what's supposed to be the great equalizer, has become the most unequal, unconstitutional garbage mess. And it's become so elitist and so systematically racist, and it's so underfunded, and there's just so many issues with it, but I can't help but like advocate for it because I'm an example of what happens when you work hard. I believe in the system even though it's unjust, and I'm trying to correct it. But I think not funding the district is going to only hurt the kids, especially whenever we have the trade programs that we have. A lot of our trade teachers at Max Hayes also teach those trades over at Tri-C. So our kids can continue the education with the same educators. And I know some of them that do. We offer a lot of trades depending on the building. You know, Glenville and MLK are merging, and so we have all of MLK's trades at Glenville now. Well, CTE programs, career technical education. At Max Hayes, we had auto body and diesel and CAD robotics and welding. Oh my God, welding was a big one. And so like, you have all these wonderful trade programs. And I mean, like the suburbs have, you know, CVCC, and Cleveland has different trades attached to different schools. And so again, that money is funding those trades. We're sitting here saying we need those trades, but then we're not willing to fund those programs. When I was at Max Hayes, we had a moment where we didn't have enough money for the welding gas for our kids to go into for our kids to go in to work on the hours they needed to get their welding certification, because Mr. McKay is an amazing welding teacher and was at Lincoln Electric and helps the kids get at least 1 or 2 welding certifications before they leave so they can get good paying jobs.
No.
One of the students I still keep in contact with has a job doing some sort of welding work back in Twinsburg, in my hometown.
Mm-hmm. But
So
one of the challenges, though, is I think what a lot of the voters will see is their budget's $1 billion. And then when they look at the math of it, it seems, I think the number I saw was like $26,000 per student or something,
yes,
which is more than what the average is for other districts. It's more, hell, it was pointed out to me that it's actually more than what like most of the Catholic and private schools are actually dealing with. So then the question would be, why is it with that large amount of money, can't they have the welding gas?
let me interject with that. So before I forget this, Cleveland, Buffalo, Flint, Michigan, those Rust Belt, heavily industrialized cities, and Pittsburgh have really bad lead issues. Lead causes a lot of really bad brain injuries that leads to like IEPs and whatnot, like learning deficiencies. Cleveland has a disgusting amount of lead poisoning. And so we have there was almost anywhere from 40 to 50% of the students at Max Hayes had an IEP any given year. So that requires so much more money immediately to deal with. And a lot of this is coming from the government funded houses. You know, it's cheaper for us to rob Social Security long-term and give these people small checks the rest of their lives instead of going and correcting the lead-based piping issues that's in all this government housing.
Mm-hmm.
You know, Buffalo, New York is really bad too. So we also have a disproportionate amount of ESL immigrants and refugees who cannot read in their native tongue. We have a lot of lead poisoning and a lot of students on we have like an outrageously high number of students on IEPs.
So what you're saying is basically you guys have a lot more work to do and a lot of challenges.
I have never taught a class where I've never taught a class that was all regular ed, and meaning every single class I've ever taught was inclusion until I got to Glenville, meaning every single student had an IEP. Like there was inclusion is like a few regular ed and IEP combined. I never had a just plain regular ed class. It was always cell inclusion. Like Cleveland is dealing with a burden of issues that people don't realize, and I can't give you details because FERPA, HIPAA, I'm not sure which.
No, I get that.
But like it's something that suburbs realistically don't see. And then when you do see it, those parents make sure that those resources are there. Well, guess what? We have so many who are affected by this. There's only so much money that can go around. So believe me when I tell you, they need that money, and there's a lot more. You know, do you know how many of our students, because poverty leads to, I had a student who came to school with bullet holes because she lived in the ghettos on West 130th and someone shot at her house, and she came the next day with bullet holes, like no big deal. Again, that child's going to need counseling and like extra services that we're going to have to partner with and pay for and this, that, and the other, because clearly the families can't afford it. So like the school takes on, you know, dental care. We work with CASE and they come and like do, so because this social safety net has essentially failed in every other aspect, the burden is being put on the school.
And here's a thought. Do you think if there was more involvement from, say, county council, city council, something along those lines? Because one thing I've realized while looking through a lot of, hey, everyone's at home now. And it seems like everything, including Cleveland's government, seems to be streaming online now. So council meetings, different committees, all of that is they're streaming online. They're doing their stuff and whatever. And if you actually look at the county or you look at the city website, they've got committees for utilities. They've got committees for health and human services. They've got so many committees. They don't have an education committee. They don't have an education committee. Now, as far as I understand, CMSD represents Cleveland. And the only, looking at this, that was one of the things that made me go, wow, this is big money, is that, CMSD's budget is $1 billion, basically. The entire city of Cleveland's budget is like $2 billion. So you would think this is such a huge, huge thing that there would be some sort of oversight, like maybe the bulk of the problems could be handled with oversight of it all, but there is none. And I did a little digging, and I have an understanding of why there isn't one now. And it pisses me off.
Okay, so what's the reasoning behind that?
Because the president of the city council apparently just isn't having one.
Because he probably doesn't want to have to listen to the union, because here's a great example. Having worked at a trade school, we were able to get our kids to bypass a lot of like the wait list so they can go right into apprenticeships.
Okay.
We had to have good union contracts to be able to do that. And so we had an administrator who was a principal who was specifically over trades. Miss John Nesta did a phenomenal job.
Okay.
And he would work with the trade unions and like our curriculum and our CTE teachers to get that set up. So again, why we have a lot of administrators is we also have you're going to have a CTE principal who's in charge of like the trades. And so that person is paid a principal's salary. So that's, even though it's like a mini program that's attached to the school. So it's kind of like a separate program that's still included in the school funding. Again, also it's very Confederate-like. Building principals have a disproportionate amount of power, and it's not very unified.
Okay.
And it's very confusing going building to building. It's some things that are like taboo or faux pas at some buildings are not at others, and like the feels are very different. And so I secretly wish like downtown would take more charge, but that's part of the Cleveland Plan charter. And I disagree with that. I don't think most building, I don't want to say that. I don't know that keeping they're so different and unique. I guess maybe that's why they do it, but it also, having gone from building to building, like as the teacher, I found that to be a difficult transition. How do you think the kids feel? Because it's school of choice. So you can live on the east side and send your kid to the brand new, Max Hayes or John Marshall on the west side. Then you have to take like the RTA downtown and catch this one and do this. Some kids have like an hour and a half commute because their parents want them to go to this good school on the west side, or they want them to go to, or they got expelled from this school, they have to go to this school. Like it's literally, there's so many factors at play, and it's like and it's so intricate because transportation plays a huge role, sports facilities, not every school, Max Hayes doesn't have a football field. We don't have a football team, so where we don't have a baseball field, our kids have to practice at the public, at the public diamond, and they have to go request it from the city. Like when I was at Twinsburg, we had the school had their own stuff, we had our own diamond for our baseball team to go practice on. We had our own soccer field for our team to go practice at. Schools in Cleveland don't do that, and they have to use public resources. And the fact that the schools don't get first priority pick on that then is I guess what's so mind blowing when they have it set up that way. And again, I guess that's part of the incompetency and corruption. I have no problem dogging the local politicians.
Yeah, see, that's something that like really I've kind of become known for being a bit of a loudmouth. I mean, and it's just, for me, I just kind of, what I think is right is what I'm going to say. And if it pisses somebody off, too bad, whatever. But
I'm not going to speak ill.
you've got to bring truth. You've got to speak truth to power. I'm sorry, you do.
I will say I understand where you're coming from this whole time, because again, your frustration is with, it's not even really with the kids. The kids
it's not.
It's garbage. It's complete and utter garbage. Like, why are we using children's futures and educations to decide? Because we want accountability in the funding. We want transparency in our government. We want like things that we have come to expect and know, and we're not getting. And it's like, people, it's such a crappy. I trust me, I get it. As like a teacher, it pains me because I understand the want to not pass it, but unfortunately, you're essentially shooting the messenger almost, because the teachers of Cleveland are going to be the ones affected, and we're not the problem. I am also have a risk of being laid off, so you're more than welcome to question what I have to say. That being said, I also taught reading intervention. So I've seen my kids improve over time, and I have data to back it up. The kids who come to class, the kids who actively participate, like when I taught Othello in my reading intervention class, I had, on any given day, I had 80, 90% of my class showing up and doing the work. Othello, Shakespeare, 10th grade. But because again, it was still something that was, it was something that interests them. They loved the irony of the name Bianca, because Bianca is white and Italian, and Bianca is a whore. So the fact that her name is white, which implies virginity, and then her profession is she's a whore. So like the kids love that irony. They love that Othello is about interracial relationships. They love the realness, because that's their that's
right.
These are some of the things that like they're very in tune with. So it also deals with getting the kids to read something that they will agree with. So, and here's a great example. I was really disappointed. So I always read Edgar Allan Poe in October.
Okay.
And so we're reading The Black Cat. And so we read about half of it, and I told the kids, read it tonight for homework. None of my students actually read it. And the good half, where he kills his wife, and then the cat, he buries his wife in the wall, and then the cat, later screams, and they find the body, and then the cat like basically laughs at him at the end. And so like that was the really good part. Like, you missed him killing his wife and hiding the body. And so after we read it together in class today, the kids were like, "Oh, that's really cool." And I'm thinking to myself, yeah, hey, you were supposed to do it for homework so we could actually have this really cool discussion, but because you didn't do it, I couldn't do this, So it was very, just sort of like, what? I'm picking something that's engaging. I gave you a story that had like gore. It sounded like, because you really like The Telltale Heart. That's always a great introduction to Poe, and we read the more adult version of it. And so I was like, I thought you guys would like it. So it's really difficult trying to pick something that, and that's something that like it's my building's focus, is to pick material that we think the kids would like, especially when we're doing virtual. Which, by the way, I want to put this out there now, because people are going to say, well, the kids are virtual, they don't need the funding. Here's primarily why Cleveland is virtual. On top of already being read, I want people to think about what it means to be in a multi-generational household, which means that your grandparents live with you, maybe your aunts and uncles. That's very common throughout the majority of the world, especially in Europe, Africa, India, elsewhere. Pretty much everywhere but America, possibly Canada, and a few other places. So a lot of our immigrant students live that way. Here on the West Side, and a lot of African American students on the East Side live that way, or they're being raised by grandparents or other family members. Our students do not necessarily come from traditional suburban households. So why are we treating our situation like, even when COVID cases were down, why are we taking the risk when our students' families are the ones that are at risk? So because I had to explain that to multiple people, like, my kids are dealing with a very different reality of this pandemic than what you may be doing sitting inside watching Netflix. That's not the reality for my children.
Right.
One of my students was shot and killed back in March. and I immunocompromised, and I went to his funeral, and it scared the crap out of me. I was a mess. I was a wreck, because one of the last things I remember saying to him before we left that Friday, because we had taken our To Kill a Mockingbird test, and I remember him saying, I said, have a good one, Amir. And he said, if this pandemic doesn't kill me, something else will. And I said, I will see you in May or whatever, thinking.
Oh, wow.
And then a few weeks later, he's shot and killed. So I'm just like, this pandemic affects my children very differently, and their needs are being adjusted differently.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want people to assume that going virtual is any less or worthy of like passing this levy. It's to accommodate for our children.
I think that where people would make that point, though, is instead of, people now that, it's by career, I'm a headhunter, I'm a recruiter. And a bulk of the offices I had worked for, frankly, they believed that if you weren't in the office, or you weren't on the way to a client's location to try and generate some business from them or whatnot, you weren't working. That was just their mindset. And it was so funny to me, because so many of the people that we've even placed would work remotely, virtually, or I recruited for GE Lighting, and I was involved in a recruitment project that was for a global implementation of an SAP software system that required, I think it was 180 different engineers that were all focused around SAP, and it was a global initiative. I had interviewed people in Hungary. I had interviewed people in, it was all over the place. It was like a 24-hour thing. And almost all of these engineers were going to be working remote. And but if you had brick and mortar place, no, the people that worked for you needed to be there. Well, the pandemic hit, and then so many people were working remotely, but then they learned, wait a second, you're saving time, because you no longer have to worry about that maybe up to an hour, maybe longer than an hour, one-way commute to work and back. You lose a lot of the money that you have to spend on the actual transportation. Oh, for the first time in history, I think automobile insurance companies were going, you know what, you're not driving as much, we're just going to discount your rates. You know,
I got $100 off my insurance a month, and I'm like,
so it's like they finally, now they have proof that you can remain just as productive working from your living room, and you can cut a lot of these expenditures. So now education is remote, so you don't have to take the kids to school. You're saving on time. There's so much else. Now they need their laptop. They need their internet connection. Teachers don't, for the most part, have to actually be in the building either. So how is there not some cost savings to it, when in their own reality, they've realized, wait a second, there is a lot of cost savings to me not actually having to leave my door to go to work.
Here's where it's going to get more expensive. You're now going to have to buy extra electronic programs for the students who aren't able to learn virtual, who are going to eventually, when the pandemic's over, come back in person anyway. The special ed or ESL students who are going to need extra programs on top of the normal curricula. I can easily see having money for backup laptops when they break. Like, I had a girl whose camera just died in the middle of a test. Like, while I was giving the NWEA, her thing died, her Chromebook died, had to go get a new one, and had to go back to the school and get a new one. So it's cheaper to get Chromebooks every year, every 2 years, that are like maybe $75 to $100. So if the kid destroys it or it gets stolen or something, it's not as big of a deal as, a $500, $600 or $1,000 MacBook laptop, that, we could afford to do that, but so until you've had to work for something like that, I'll say it, knowing this firsthand, when I had to pay for my iPod out of pocket. The first iPod Nano that came out, I had to pay for that sucker $250 out of pocket. So you really don't appreciate something until you pay for it out of pocket, until you Yeah, so I'll say that for because when I was that age, I was the same way. And so like I've heard my kids say this stupid piece of garbage Chromebook. One of my girls was telling me that, one of the kids tried to go pawn it, and the guy was like, "No, that's a CMSD laptop. I'm not taking that." Like the
Wow.
one
Wow.
laughed at him, and I'm like, "Yes, that's what I want to hear."
So what you're saying basically though is the money is still the same. It's just now going in a different direction to other stuff.
Yeah, it's going to a lot of other things. I mean, we're still going to be feeding the kids. But again, having the kids pick up 1 week's worth of meals, we, didn't necessarily have to have that. We got food deliveries 2 days a week. So we didn't have the fridge space beforehand for that we needed now. We are giving, with more supplies and more students that are coming from, again, Puerto Rico is going to continue to hemorrhage people, and Cleveland and New York and Miami are going to continue to be hotspots, and Philly. And so that's the reality of the situation. Immigration's only going to continue. And then and again, inflation is still very real. And the fact that for 8 years we haven't asked for an increase, I thought was really impressive. And what I want people to understand is CMSD's merit-based pay. So like for me to get a raise, I have to get like skilled or accomplished. Like I have to get like a certain number of points and go up in a bracket and whatnot. I don't get a raise I don't get like a 5% raise every year or something. Like it's.
I get it. Now we actually have a question in the chat. Now you're pretty well versed in the numbers of everything, right?
Somewhat.
When it comes to the tax part, at least. I mean, it's I believe it was 15 mil, and they're asking for the additional
for an extra 5. Yeah, it's $175 a year for a house that's about $100,000.
How much is it?
It's $175 a year for a $100,000 house.
Okay, I know the number that I was hearing floated around for the longest time was $7 a month per $45,000 value of a house. So that doesn't really seem like it's in line with that, though, because I mean that's 84. So that's kind of another challenge I think a lot of people have is how the numbers, nothing seems to add up specifically. Like a lot of the stuff I looked for was just on CMSD's website. There's stuff on there that contradicts other things that you find on CMSD's website. So
CMSD's thing that Eric Gordon just came out with, that one was because that was sent to the state of Ohio. Because part of the Cleveland plan is we had to have that plan ready to go. So that is the most accurate, up-to-date, numbers-based what Eric Gordon recently came out with, because that was sent to the state of Ohio.
Okay.
And so it's $11.25 a month
for $100,000
for $100,000 property.
Yeah. Okay. And now the question was, how will the property taxes on business stack up to neighboring cities if the levy is passed? So I guess that kind of translates into, do you think it's going to, for business property owners, do you think it's going to mean more for them to leave Cleveland to open up somewhere else?
No, and here's a load of garbage, and I'm sick of people ignoring the fact that Cleveland has a tax abatement program for the last decade that they're also potentially going to renew. And that basically meant there was no tax increase on any properties that were essentially built on, and like, so that's a load of garbage.
Cleveland, so this won't actually, even if this passes, it wouldn't raise anyone's business property tax?
I don't want to say it wouldn't raise business property taxes, but I know what the tax abatement does is it prevents them from paying an increase. Like when they upgrade their business facilities, normally, because when you upgrade, the value of it goes up and the tax goes up. The tax abatement prevents you, like, say you bought, this $50,000, garbage building, and you renovated it to $500,000, you're still paying the $50,000 tax on it, for the next 10 years. You have a tax abatement. And again, property taxes fund the schools.
Yeah, so, that's where it
again. So I don't want to hear businesses complaining about that, because there's also a tax abatement in place. And yes, it's done wonders for the city, but trickle down economics doesn't work. The state of Kansas was a functioning example of that. And look at their education. Was it Kansas or was it Oklahoma? No, it was Kansas. Brownback. No, Brownback was Kansas. Yeah. Kansas is an utter failure because Governor Sam Brownback already showed. I mean, they went to 3 days a week at one point because it was getting so bad in their public school systems. I mean, so that doesn't work, and that our schools shouldn't be dependent upon that either. Again, another reason why we shouldn't be funding schools on property taxes, because if you want to have a tax abatement to try and get small business owners, which I could understand and be in favor of, I'm all about it. I fully support the Cleveland. I love the local businesses of Cleveland. Like the Blackbird Cafe in Lakewood is a great little place to go. There's Gypsy.
Well, see, here's kind of that's you mentioned a place in Lakewood. That unfortunately it wouldn't be like I actually know people that have opened businesses in Lakewood because they wanted to open them in Cleveland, West Park, wherever, they wanted to open them in Cleveland. And it's so difficult trying to get help from anyone. It's like all of these other, Lakewood's basically like, you come here, we're going to help you. We will show you the process. We will walk you through it. You talk to anybody in Cleveland, from council to their neighborhood development corps or any of that stuff, and you gotta, well, I guess we've got to look into how that happens or whatever. And then like years will go by and they still won't have anything figured out.
Look at the astronomical property taxes that Lakewood has compared to Cleveland.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, that will help to explain that right there, because I'm literally leaving Lakewood as soon as possible and moving to the Cleveland side, even if they do pass the
levy.
Yeah, because I'm like, it's still cheaper. It's still significant. I mean, I have my issues with Lakewood, and they're gonna hear about it real soon. But that's a whole nother story.
How soon can you come to Cleveland?
Yeah, so I'm coming in. Listen, I'm right over the line anyway, so I cross the street and I'm on Cleveland territory, so it's not a big deal. But yeah, so it's hop, skip, and a jump because I love Edgewater Park. But yeah, it's again a property tax issue, and this insane idea that we should fund our schools on property taxes, which is absolutely absurd. But
I'm curious about, maybe you would know, because that's one thing I don't, because this is really, I mean, I think when we first started talking, I told you, it's like I'm someone who's always voted for the levies.
Mm-hmm.
And I am finally at the point where I'm like, no, I don't want to. Mm-hmm. I don't want to pay them more, just because I haven't seen what I think is, I haven't seen a benefit, and that's just my ignorant self to it, because I also don't really pay attention enough. But at least from in the business world, it's like mostly I deal with engineers and operations folks, but occasionally some of the companies would have me look for labor, things of that nature. But that was kind of a rarity. But the truth is, more often than not, when it comes to engineers, if you've got the choice of someone who went to Ohio State versus University of Phoenix, they're kind of like, look, we don't, well, truth is, when it comes to labor force and things like that, I've also heard, don't give me somebody who is from Cleveland Public Schools.
Yes.
And unfortunately, when it's, this is just recent, and I know that, well, I've tried pushing every one of these levies every chance that they've gotten, and I don't know about the whole, what I do know about Cleveland Municipal School District is that they waste a lot, and the other podcast you can listen to what Brent was telling me about a training that was for each teacher. That was, I think he said it was something around the lines of 10 grand per teacher was there for this weekend of training. And it was like 100 some teachers, and it was all for something that no teacher would actually use in class anyway.
Yeah. Yep. Or I'll give you another example. It's cheaper to pay us overages. And so, for an example, after like 15 special ed students, if you have more than 15, you get like an overage. So like I get like $1 per student per day. So if I had 25 sped students, I'm getting $10 a day that I have that class. And so like it's cheaper for the district to pay the teachers overages like that than it is to hire another teacher and have a whole nother sped class that doesn't go above the numbers. So then the students aren't getting the best classroom possible. They're not getting, so like, yes,
they give you $1 per day per extra kid. That's it.
What?
They give you $1 per day per extra kid.
Yeah, for like for sped, for example, yeah, it's only $1 per day per kid. And it depends on the type of sped. So like, again, you have things like that, or like if the principal doesn't have the schedule ready, you file a grievance, and like it happens every year, and that costs money. You know, we need to have the schedule ready. We need to know what we're teaching. We need to have class. Like I've never been in a building where the schedule has been done by the first day. Like that never has happened. You know, school of choice also has kids moving around constantly the first few weeks that we never have an accurate count of anything. There's just so many variables. So like, I understand that there's also that aspect of waste that people will call it, because my contract is protecting me from being abused. But then at the same time, the district's thing is I'll just throw money at it because it's cheaper than trying to hire a new teacher or trying to actually fix the problem.
Right.
Sort of like how they'd rather bleed Social Security dry instead of trying to fix the lead piping in public housing. It's being intentionally done to an extent, I believe. But in this case, still the majority of the funding, I don't believe as much goes to like grievances and whatnot as we think. I think a lot of it does go towards those extra programs that we don't think about, like the counseling that I'm sure, I'm gonna botch the name, Maritas Taylor. They do phenomenal work with our students, because our kids need counseling or therapy of some sort, or like, you know, Metro. A lot of our students use Metro on West 25th. So like, again, the schools basically become the social safety net for a lot of these kids. So also think about, you're stuck between a rock and the hard place, and until more people are actively voting and paying attention in their local elections, it won't change. Like until you have people who are voting out the entire city council and the mayor and saying like, all right, put someone in who actually represents us, who's local, and have the mayor appoint local people to the school board, local educators, and maybe a business owner or two, but not make business. Again, another thing that's blowing my mind is the fact that we keep saying, how did they phrase it? They said that business, I personally have this belief that like businesses have too much say in our public schools right now, and it's becoming problematic. Partners, I think, is what they're trying to call them. And so one of the other things that people don't realize, like public schools that don't have enough money will take grants. And then like we had the Ford, this grant with Ford, and we had to implement this Academies of Cleveland model, a pure academy. So if you were in the welding academy, you had to take, or if you were in the IT transportation or welding or whatever academy, you had to take English with all the same, like you were with classes with all the same people all day because they were in the same academy as you. So having pure academies, and you can relate all the content back to they're trying to like push that garbage, but that doesn't work for our students because we have so many students with different learning needs and whatnot.
And is that why John Marshall has like 4 different schools supposedly?
Yes. Oh my, and Max Hayes has 4 different, like they're called pathways. And so instead of getting a liberal arts education, they're trying to like formalize everything. And like, there's a big thing with STEM versus STEAM, because STEM doesn't work. You have to include the arts and the humanities, or else STEM it doesn't make sense. And we have a lot to show for that too, that STEM doesn't work. You need STEAM, you need to include the arts. So like, there's just so many different theories. And I said this at the beginning, there's no consistency. There's very little consistency. Nothing has been in place long enough that we can actually test to see if it works, because everything is so political. The moment it starts failing, we immediately pull it out from underneath. Yeah. And I'm like, this is not working. Education is still, I mean, we know a lot about how we learn, but there's still a lot more to learn. So I think we, as a country and as a public educational institution, need to take a step back and say, we need to fund this appropriately, like we do the rest of the world. This is why we're so far behind compared to most of the Western countries. Even though we spend exorbitant amounts of money, our students have greater needs and we have a higher cost of living. We also have a disproportionate amount of wealth in certain areas, while rural and urban areas are being left scraps.
I mean, just being honest, coming into this, one thing I had never taken into account is how, frankly, the kids in Cleveland and the kids in many municipal school districts, bigger areas, may have different needs, more costly needs. And that was just something that never came into play for me. So that was eye-opening for me. Now,
yes.
one other thing, what would you say to somebody who, this was a comment that was from one of the initial threads in one of the Facebook groups, and it was someone, we'll call him Jumbo. It says, I wish I had $1 for every time someone hung a baby or child in front of me as a reason to support something. Kids are weapons for causes because you can't oppose them publicly without taking any sort of guff for it. Metaphorical bullets. Mm-hmm. And I mean, unfortunately, while going through this was an interesting thing that I threw up in a neighborhood group. And it was basically, talking about it since that was when I found out that the CMSD budget is $1 billion, $1,779 million to be exact. And that's when I made the comparison to the city's budget of, what it is. And mm-hmm. There was an onslaught of people who were like, no, you've got to vote for this. Don't you know dark money is fighting against it? And it's like as soon as the dark money talk comes up, that's the same thing to me as when our city officials were telling us when the riot happened, no, everything is from people outside of the state. All they're really trying to do is downplay the validity of what actually happened. No, it's not our people that were part of this. No, it's everyone from, they were shipped in, they were paid protest and stuff like that. And it's like, really? Well, then why is it that Erie is the furthest away anyone got in trouble from? Come on. You need to downplay what really happened.
Cleveland.com said it's a Republican group in Florida that is attached to this group in Dayton that's pushing the anti-Levy stuff. It is from outside of the city, but they think it may be property owners from downtown.
I mean, see, the truth is there's legitimate gripe.
Legitimate,
and they're trying to downplay that.
And I was talking to a wealthy friend of mine who said, the city is incredibly overtaxed in so many areas. This is just the one thing. This is the one tax where it's like, nope, we need to support it. He's like, he's like, being a very wealthy member of this city, giving what I give, and he's absolutely right. And I agree with him. This is the one thing we cannot give up on. And I'll give you a great example. You would not want an uneducated society. You don't. You don't. So at the very least, to have a functioning society and continue on with the idea of freedom, you need to educate a society. And this will go back even to Mary Wollstonecraft's A Vindication of the Right of Woman. Of women. And so she talks about mothers nurture the children and raise them. So if women are not given an education to become a good mother, how can they raise a functioning society? And so going back to Mary Wollstonecraft's argument there is same thing. If we don't have a well-funded educational system, we're going to have something where we have fake news central. People, and I always tell my students, don't get your news on YouTube. Always check the source and whatnot. So it's just ironic that if anyone is listening to this on YouTube,
can I point out the obvious though?
Oh, go ahead.
Well, with that being said, this is an extension of a levy that's already in place and in addition to it.
Yes.
You tell me, do you think that's provided us with an educated populace?
More educated, yes, because I do know students who are in the military doing their trades. I do know students who are out in the workforce doing their trades. I can speak because I personally help these students. I helped one with his resume again when he was applying for a new job. I helped another student who is bilingual, who is now planning on becoming a fireman, so he can help service the community because he's far more fluent in English and Spanish. So I do I do know students, like another one of my students is doing dental work. I do know our students are making strides. It's going to be slow. And what people don't realize is the 50s and 60s is when we got rid of, is when we had integrated schools. It's going to take more than 50 or 60 years for like our poor population of people of color, because Cleveland's primarily a Black city. It's going to take more than a few decades to get them back on their feet. I mean, you're looking at years of institutionalized racism, and then white flight happened. Look at how successful the suburbs are. And that was just pulled out from underneath. So I believe there's a crap ton of corruption in city council, and that may lead into the school board. I'm not going to say it would. I absolutely believe it. It's in city council and the mayor. Yes. I've seen a lot of good lately from Eric Gordon. Actually, during the pandemic, I'm a huge critic behind, like, if you were to ask my friends behind closed doors, I have my critical opinions of how it's set up and the fact that we call him a CEO. I don't believe the school should be run like a business. No government entity should be run like a business, especially not a school. And so but I will say Mr. Gordon has done a phenomenal job handling the pandemic. And just accommodating our children, understanding and being real. Like, he basically the first 2 weeks said, I don't want you to try and teach too heavily. I want you to understand that this may or may not work, and that's okay. This is the first, like, it was a very real, very personal email, but I was like, that's what I wanted to hear. As a teacher, I wanted you to understand that this may not work, and I may know that this may not work, but like, we're in this together. And so that was a very real aspect that I very much I liked about him.
He thinks it's a business, or he actually cares about the kids?
I truly do believe, to an extent, he cares about the kids. I do. I will say that as someone who's very passionate about the kids, I believe he does. Okay. I truly will say I believe he does. And trust me, I'm very critical of like management. I have no problem criticizing principals. But I believe, at least at the top level, at the highest level, I believe Eric Gordon does care about our kids. I believe he's done a far better job than most people in other situations that I've seen and that I know of. I mean, I did some student teaching in Akron. I love North High School. Shout out to North. Carrie, I hope you're doing well, Carrie. So, I mean, again, I will say I do believe Eric Gordon's heart is in the right place. I believe he's done a good job as far as like the pandemic's concerned, and actually just adjusting to the needs of our kids. You know, when Hurricane Maria hit, the district responded appropriately with our Hispanic population. They did some rallying, so that was really nice to see. So, I mean, again, it's coming along. It's a slow progression, but it is happening. It's not happening at the level and the rate people want it to. Yeah. But again, nothing good, worth like solid, worth having, it's not going to come overnight, ladies and gentlemen. It's down. And again, especially with education, when things are constantly changing, like very few things in education are constant. So let this be the experiment then. You know, does the Cleveland plan long term, 50 years in, does it work? That's more accurate than 8 or 10 years in. I don't necessarily know that that's enough time. So again, and as someone, let me put this into perspective. As a teacher, I don't get pay into Social Security. I have a second job in the private sector. I do pay into Social Security. Because of the windfall agreement, I will never, because I'll have so much cut, I'll never be able to collect my Social Security, but I still pay into it anyway. And in the same token, just because you don't have children, you should still want to help help your city, help society function and grow. And so I know that's a lot to ask for, especially in the middle of a pandemic. I know it's a lot to ask to pay more, but it's a long-term investment. Education in general is a long-term investment.
Here's something for you, though. I know a number of parents who their plan, they've got kids, elementary school, whatever. Mm-hmm. Their goal, though, is to buy a house outside of Cleveland so their kids don't have to go to high school in Cleveland. I know others who have before school age children who are basically doing everything they can. Hell, I know some that probably have a Lakewood address on, even though their primary residence is actually in Cleveland, who are, because they want them to stay away from Cleveland schools.
And here's the irony.
Them.
If you're a CMSD graduate, as long as you go to a public school that's part of our program, you're going for free. Like they have this huge thing where there's this giant foundation is basically paying for any of our graduates. They'll pay their tuition to go to an in school, and I think there's a few schools in Michigan that's part of it as well.
For the free college degree?
Yeah, the free college thing. So like, actually, I mean, again, I know someone who also sold her house, got an apartment in Shaker, so her child could go to Shaker public schools, and then her kid got a full ride. So yeah. Again, when the school district has that much determination, like determines that much, yeah, that's why. I mean, the fact that people are willing to pick up and move their lives for a school district like that, that should tell you just how important it is to continue to fund our schools. And the fact that people are willing to do that just shows it's so important. And who's primarily getting screwed over? What color who happens to be taken over by these plans? It's primarily inner cities. They're primarily people of color, primarily poor. They're set up to fail at this point. So until that control is given back at the local level, which the people of Cleveland need to like vote in their local elections. That's realistically.
What do they vote for to make that change?
Get rid of the mayor and the current politicians that you have and put a mayor who's going to fight for your city. You know, go have a mayor who's going to stand up to the Ohio House of Representatives. Columbus has always tried to control Cleveland because until recently, Cleveland was always bigger in population and was always just dominant in Ohio. It's Cleveland.
See, here's kind of another thing, though. Then to that, I'd almost have to wonder. Last election, there was challengers to Frank Jackson who also had the name thing. You know, there was potential. You didn't hear any of them crying about this education thing. You didn't hear the school board cry. You didn't hear any of the teachers. You didn't hear anything talking about this.
Oh, you heard, trust me. If you would have known me back then, you would have heard me complaining about it. Since I found out the authority that Frank Jackson has, I've been disgusted by it. When I found out how Cleveland had its school board taken away from them, like from the local level, anyone who supports that is a hypocrite. How dare you sit there and say you're in favor of democracy and then took that right for the people to govern themselves away? Like, you're no better. You're just, especially for an issue like education that is such a localized issue at that point, like, it's kind of, for me, it's disgusting. It's disgusting. And that's why the people of Cleveland need to like rise up and do something about it. Let them know that you're not going to take it. It's not okay. You have a large population. Utilize it. Utilize your voice. The problem is, are people registered to vote? Are people going to go out and vote? Have they been affected enough that they want things to change? Do they know how things are going to change? You know, some people are so jaded by the system because they think voting doesn't work. But living in Ohio, your voice actually does matter. It's not like California or Massachusetts or Alabama. You know, it's not predetermined. Your voice does matter here. Local, state, and federal, all three. As Ohioans, all three are important. And I cannot stress that enough. I cannot stress the number of people who had to fight for that, because I would not have been able to vote if my family would just come to this country. But that's another chat for another day.
Yeah, you know? Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So that's for me, I think the biggest way, if you really want to see change, I mean, obviously vote for the levy, vote in your local elections, vote in your local elections. Vote in your local, state, and federal elections.
Everyone, I mean, what I'm excited about is I am hoping, you know, I've been very critical of both sides.
Yes.
For lack of a better word. And you know what? You want to know why 2016 went the way it did? because Democrats are lazy.
Yes.
Historically, they don't get out to the polls, but nobody wants to hear that. And then I heard all this talk in 2018 about the blue wave, blue wave. Yeah, well, guess what? They didn't get out to the polls then either. And they just, and people were like, well, but they did more than ever. No, if you're telling me
come out, it was young people that didn't come out either, because old people will always come out and vote because they're dependent upon Social Security and Medicare, Medicaid. Like old people are the most reliable voting bloc ever. They have nothing else to do. Guys, come on, get that through your head. Stop smoking enough weed and drink enough to get to a poll and vote. Because I promise you, the old racist grandma down the street waving her cane and screaming racial obscenities from her porch, Mrs. Dubose style, is going to go vote. She is. She has nothing better to do than harass people from her front porch. I cannot stress that enough. The ability to go and express your right to vote, and be on the lookout for whenever I start with ranked choice voting, because I want, given Ohio, I would love to see that play out. I think you would see a lot more third parties have a say in Ohio, and I think the Libertarian Party would be much more powerful than the Republican Party in the state.
Well, I will tell you one thing. I mean, I'll enjoy having that conversation because, I mean, look, you've made me change my mind on wanting to vote against the levy.
Good.
This conversation. But the reason being, it's really because it's going to cost more to educate kids who have more challenges. That's it. That's something I think most people don't take into account. You know, I was talking with people about, you know, sending kids to Catholic schools and whatnot. Well, you know what? Most of the Catholic schools are not dealing with a lot of the same. And don't get me wrong, they have a lot of different programs. They're dealing with a lot of challenges on their own, but it's more of an isolated thing. It's more of a couple of students here and there versus what you're dealing with entire classes, you know? And I mean, the kids that are going to the Catholic schools, you know, the other thing, the part of your fight is, you know, the number one ability is their availability. You have to fight to get them there. You don't have kids going to Catholic schools that are cutting school on the regular basis.
Correct.
Okay? You don't have them just blowing it off, not going in. You know, a parent that's actually paying, you know, a couple thousand a month or something is not going to treat the kid cutting school in the same way that, you know, I really wish they'd get back to school because I needed that babysitter throughout the day.
Yep.
You know, it's a whole different ball game. And that's just from this conversation. That's one thing. But again, unfortunately, guess what? The people that are fighting for your levy don't have a shot because it's turned into a Democrat versus Republican thing.
Yes.
And because the people that are trying to give out the information, give out like the challenges you have to face versus the other ones is a powerful talking point that no one's using. You know, you're the first person who said that versus, and there's other teachers that are saying this, and it's like, hold on a second, you don't sound right. I had one teacher, like we're both in agreement that whatever the numbers are, like the CMSD budget's about $1 billion. You know, you've seen the numbers, I've seen the numbers. There's a teacher on the internet who's trying to say, no, I found something that says it's only $700 million. And it's like, that's not the right information. So if you're trying to argue this point with people who legitimately want the information to decide, you're doing it wrong.
Confirmation bias. They're only going to look for things that are going to confirm their opinion.
Right.
Yeah. And again, going back to like the sourcing and check your sources, check your facts. Like, and again, it's going back to that information and how do you disseminate what's legitimate and what's not.
Get the right information out there so people can make an informed decision. Because I mean, you know, I probably, and you know, one of my friends, his wife is a teacher, and I mean, I'm honest when it comes to, you know, most of the things I think people vote for, they're ignorant of. Okay. Yes. Instead of wasting all of my time learning about every single issue, I do one specific thing in a lot of cases. If it's something I don't want to learn anything about, I go to somebody I trust that I know knows about the issue, and I say, what do you think I should do? And then they tell me. And then I go, okay, so that's what I'm going to do. And I voted for all kinds of people based on that, you know? Yeah. And I decided for my friend whose wife is a teacher, because he has concern for her situation, then you know what? I'll vote for it just for her.
Yeah.
And it's because fine, whatever. I'll do that because I don't ever want to be the deciding vote that hurts somebody.
Yes. And I understand
That's my thing. So even if I'm like, well, I don't want to, it's like, would I pay an extra whatever it is to make sure someone's life is still good? Yeah, I would, and it just, but now you actually, like, from this conversation, you gave me reason of why I should want to vote for this.
Good.
It's
I'm glad.
I hope other people listening to this did. I don't know whether they did or how many, are listening or what. The few things that were mentioned in the chat, I addressed. And if you have any other questions about it, feel free to, throw them into the comment section for afterwards. And, I don't know. We've only got a couple of weeks really until the election now.
Yeah.
And
I'll be honest, I think a lot of it will also depend, because remember, the district gets a lot of funding from the federal government. So depending on who wins, I also will see, I believe you'll see a return of resources depending on which candidate gets back in. Because there was a lot of resources that were diverted from CMSD starting in 2016. We have some undocumented immigrants in the district, and that doesn't sit well with the federal government right now. So it's, and you will never be able to figure it out, because a lot of the Hispanics have adopted each other's dialects. So they will try and mimic, a Puerto Rican dialect and sound Puerto Rican. And if you don't know
for each other,
if you don't know the difference in the in like the dialects of like the Caribbean versus South American versus Central versus like Castellano, it was such a learning experience in itself. I mean, trust me that when you start to work in the district and you start to talk to people, you realize the uphill fight that a lot of the kids have. You're like, okay, this is heartbreaking. And so I want to shine a light on those things, because I feel like once they get solved, a lot of this can start to go away, or at least a lot of this, the first step to solving an issue is acknowledging it. And I think that's one of the most important things we need to do right now. The lead poisoning thing needs to be a discussion that we have. How are we going to tackle that? That's and again, it's only in select areas that were, industrialized during, in the Rust Belt. So
Cleveland finally has an initiative. They put forth some legislation, and they've done some stuff in regards to having the lead removed. So that's definitely a good step. This is less than a year old. I think a lot of the big stuff for this was happening just before the pandemic hit.
Yeah.
But they've got some.
That's just one example, but yeah, that's one that, again, people don't think how does that affect you'd be surprised how it affects our kids. There's so many things where you just don't think. I had a boy from Colombia who just some of the horror stories I've heard from the kids. You really want to talk about people who would kill to give their kids a better life. So you'd be surprised. It's right here in your backyard in Cleveland. And you know what? It's one of the greatest learning experiences I've ever had. It's been very eye-opening for me, and people need to understand the problems that the city's facing. And so I'm glad to be able to come on and be able to discuss this and sort of bring about some knowledge and shine some light on it, because I think as the sooner we start acting on it, the sooner things can, again, I truly believe things can get better. It's just, we have to want to do it.
I really think, and that's one of the reasons why I want to do this podcast, is because there's so many things I personally have a problem with, just a lot of things that happen. But one of the big reasons is because I have a certain vision of certain things that I think are just obvious, that should be a certain way and that people should focus on it, and they don't. And then when I'll talk to politicians about it, they're of the mindset of, well, what can I do? And it's like, what do you mean? Whether you got voted, people voted for you because they thought you could do something about this. You're telling me that there's just nothing you can do. Well, there's just nothing we can do. Oh, we don't know. We've never dealt with that before. And it's like, like the situation that happened with me over the weekend and finding out, wait a second. So your yard can be a crime scene. You can have glass and stuff all over from something that happened that's no fault of your own, but it's actually then your responsibility to get it all cleaned up. Like, wow, really? And that's just something that I always assumed was that's just part of the investigation. It's a crime scene. They're going to make sure that it's all put back to however it was beforehand. Boy, was I wrong. Boy, was I wrong.
I feel like the only other avenue of recourse you can do is the person who crashed, but they were killed.
Yeah, they were killed. So
they were killed. So like that's
it's like, well,
not gonna work.
Yeah, how does that? So it's. I just kind of shake my head, but I mean that's like an extreme example. But there's so many little things, and it's like the even talking about just the issues with the school system. I had no idea that really we've got this thing's got a major budget, yet the people that we elect to represent us don't even have a say in any of this. And it's just like, wow, really? Like, unfortunately, the more you start looking, the more you realize that it's really kind of like a rabbit hole of, hey, guess what? All those years where you really weren't involved in anything? Well, that's why things are how they are now, because they just went, nobody cares. We'll do it this way, and then it doesn't turn into an issue until it's a Jimmy DeMora situation. The corruption's run rampant and people end up in jail. And then they make a new county council who does even less. And then you go, wait, what?
Yep. And you know what? I'll be honest. Like right now, the district is really riding on the backs of the paras and the teachers, like the ones in the classroom. Like right now, I've never seen so many people go out of their way and use their free time to like help accommodate a kid for something, or like to do. It's pretty mind blowing what the teachers are willing to do for the kids. And I mean, of course, you're going to have your crappy teachers. You're going to have that everywhere. But the teachers who are dedicated to the kids are especially the ones who are in the district. And they're like, I want to see it get better.
Yeah.
Or they're the most passionate, the most involved. They're the ones who are like, I'm here for the kids because realistically, this is the only way things are going to change is for them to embrace this, go to college and leave this behind so that you can have a better life. And so the kids who do come will go and do just that. They will go get an associate's or bachelor's or master's or PhD. They will go on to do great things. They're just like everyone else. And I think people also struggle because there's this stereotype or this perception that our kids are just automatic failures, juvenile delinquents. And so it's very eye-opening, especially because I came from a suburb. So and I'm just like, that's not the case at all though. Yet you hear on the news every night of like the violence in the neighborhoods. And it's like, and then I go to that, neighborhood during the day. And I'm like, I walk to the gas station right next door and I'm fine. And I'm just like, it's such a disconnect. So I think if people would stop and actually just get to know the people of the community and like the people of the city and see that the perception is not what's really there. There's a lot more to it. And the complexities that are involved, I think people just don't know enough about it. And to sit there and try and learn it is even more of a mind, like is Olympic gymnastics and just the amount of cognitive like hoops that you have to jump through. And so it's just easier for people to just ignore it or pretend like the school isn't doing it or just scapegoat teachers. The Big Short at the very end, when they talked about how society scapegoats teachers, they generally do. They always say the educational system failed, the teachers failed, blah, 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 blah. Maybe the teachers did fail.
Why doesn't anyone Point to the administration failing.
Why doesn't anyone point to the parents or the kid who, didn't want to put the drive in themselves? I mean, there are so many, but again, the teachers are always the one, it goes off that saying, those who can't do, teach. But the ironic thing is, in order to be able to teach something in the American educational system, you have to be able to do it. Because we have to be able to model it and do the gradual release. I do, we do, you do. So if I couldn't do it, I wouldn't be teaching. So again, it's just, there's so many misconceptions about education too.
Right.
And that was something else that blew my mind, just in general. Because again, going to a suburban high school, I had a very one-track mind of, I had a great education. I was well prepared. My high school was harder than my college was. I remember laughing, literally going into my English lit class in college, looked at one of the guys who had the same English teacher as me for Honors 11 English the year before me back in high school. We were both studying the same thing in college. His mom and my mom are good friends.
Okay.
And go into our English 1 class, look at the syllabus of the things we're reading, and I kid you not, it was literally the same thing I had read in my Honors 11 English class. I did not do one assignment from that. I literally, I hate to say this, I recopied a lot of the stuff that I wrote in 11th grade and because I'm like, I already read Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. I already read Beowulf. I already read, so I'm just like, I already did all of this. Like, it's literally the same thing, and we're having the same talking points and the Canterbury Tales and So, like, again, I know what it's like to have a really good public education, and I want my kids to have the same. I want my students to have the same. Like, I feel like if I wanted to go to med school, I feel like I could apply and I could go. I feel like regardless of what I wanted to do in life, I believe that I have the ability to teach myself, and I have the critical thinking ability and at least basic writing and reading abilities that I got from my high school before becoming an English major and an English teacher. So I would also argue that like my high school prepared me very well, very rigorously. Again, my high school was harder than college. So I want my kids to be prepared for that. So
I'll tell you what, thank you for the fight, man. Thank you.
Listen, I'm glad I could change at least one mind. And if I can change more out there, if anyone wants to talk, let's talk. But yeah, I'm glad I could convince you otherwise, because you were pretty skeptical. I
really was.
Yeah, I know. Based on our conversation, I was like, oh wow, he's really a skeptic. Like, this is gonna be rough.
Yeah, my challenge is, I don't know how else to put it. My challenge really just boils down to, I know there's some mismanagement going on, and the ways that I think the mismanagement's supposed to be fixed apparently are impossible.
Yeah.
Like, I don't even know how else to put it. It sounds like, hey, you know what? Well, we can't talk to our elected officials about it. They have no say in it. There's no one really that has a say in it except for the mayor, and everyone that could have done something to change what happens with the mayor was silent when there was the mayoral election, really. Like, I mean, back then, guess what? I mean, you might have been preaching to, it's kind of like you're yelling over a open cavern or whatever, and it's like, do you hear me? And there's no one there listening. You're echoing back at yourself.
Yeah.
Fortunately, that's just the way it was, where no one, God, could you imagine? Hell, I voted for Frank Jackson to be mayor. You know what? Had I known what I know now about this, I probably would have pushed for one of the other candidates. And I now that I know more details about this as a whole, I mean, I'll tell you off air what I know about the what we talked about when Mayor Frank Jackson retires or whatever.
Yeah.
I'll tell you what I know about that. And unfortunately, it's probably not good for you.
Yeah. Yeah.
But either way, I think gonna wrap this up. I want to thank everybody for listening. I want to thank you, Chris, for coming on and helping clarify some of this stuff and getting some of this information out there. It was a great conversation, man. I really enjoyed it.
I'm glad I had the ability to do it, and I'm glad I can help to fight the injustice in the system.
Excellent. And I mean, thank you for listening to Let Me Talk. Hopefully we can have more and more conversations of this nature with other people about issues that are, like I said, interesting topics with interesting people. Let's have some interesting conversations. And You know, go out and vote. Make sure
Yeah.
that, you know, we do something good, whatever you think is good, you know? And all right, you guys have a good night.